Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
If you enjoy our show and you find our research interesting, please leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Something that small really does go a long way in helping us out. You can find more about us and the research that we do by heading over to Instagram and searching our name. As always, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hoaxes. As per Wikipedia, quote, "A hoax is a widely publicized falsehood, so fashioned as to invite reflective, unthinking acceptance by the greatest number of people of the most varied social identities and of the highest possible social pretensions, that is done in order to gull its victims into putting up the highest possible social currency in support of the hoax. A hoax is often intended as a practical joke or to cause embarrassment, or to provide social or political change by raising people's awareness of something." Unquote. I've always been fascinated by hoaxes on the grand scale. The Cottingley Fairies, the Tiara of Saint-Chafern, Hitler's Diaries, the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, the 2009 Balloon Boy incident, Anna Anderson and her claim to be Anastasia Romanov, and finally I can't exclude the shed at Dulwich, which is possibly the most recent on this list and was pulled off by my good friend Uber Butler. These hoaxes were believed by millions the world over, and some, even though have been debunked since, are still believed by many. I find these stories really intriguing. The basic element of hoaxes is still very much alive within social media and mainstream media circles currently. Bad actors are aware that perpetrating fake news on a large scale and doubling down on it is a path to political persuasion for their personal end goals. Methods that were perfected by Joseph Goebbels in 1944. Goebbels, as Hitler's Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, masterminded the Nazi propaganda machine and executed its murderous agenda. It's his methods that are used in political fake news agendas today. His famous quote, "If you repeat a lie often enough, eventually it becomes the truth," unquote. It's a staple tactic in fake news, hoaxes, and political corruption. Well, tonight I want to discuss a possible hoax that has received little conversation since its initial emergence into the public domain back in the late 1940s. It's a subject that I find interesting, in particular because there remains the possibility that this isn't a hoax at all, but a true and genuine claim. I'm talking about the claims of Brushy Bill Roberts. Now, I'll admit I'm a sucker for the Old West. I watched endless cowboy and western movies as a kid with my grandfather. The Searchers, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Unforgiven, Tombstone, Shane, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 3:10 to Yuma, and High Noon. Hell, I could go on and on. In recent years, I've become obsessed with the 8-part documentary series directed by Stephen Ives and produced by Ken Burns, titled The West. When it comes to detailed and historically accurate documentaries, you can never go far wrong with Ken Burns. The man is a master. If you have Amazon Prime, you can watch this series via the PBS add-on, and it's well worth the subscription fee on its own. No promo, I just adore the work of Ken Burns. Anyway, back to Brushy Bill Roberts. For those of you listening who aren't aware of this gentleman, allow me to explain. Brushy Bill Roberts, who was also known as William Henry Roberts amongst other aliases, was an American man who came to national attention in the late 1940s. Roberts claimed to be Western outlaw William H. Bonney, affectionately known as Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid is assumed to have died on the 14th of July 1881, shot just above the heart by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Garrett had been elected sheriff of Lincoln County, New Mexico in November 1880, having defeated the incumbent Sheriff George Kimball by a vote of 320 to 179. Garrett assembled a posse and set out to apprehend the kid almost immediately, desperate to start his sheriff's term with a big-name score, the biggest name at the time. Of course, the $500 bounty that New Mexico Governor Lew Wallace placed on Billy's head wouldn't go unappreciated either. Garrett and his posse were heavy-handed though, and enforcing the law seemed to come secondary to killing the kid and his gang. Ultimately, after Garrett murdered Billy the Kid in the darkness where the kid couldn't see, Garrett did collect the $500 bounty, as well as an additional $7,000 that were raised by residents of the towns and cities of New Mexico. The celebration of what Garrett did was short-lived, however, and the public quickly turned against him, accusing him of unfairly ambushing Billy in the dark. Garrett tried to clear his name by releasing a book titled, quote, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, unquote, in April 1882. But ultimately the public weren't interested and it sold very poorly. In February 1908, Garrett was murdered following a dispute with his landlord over land and the purchase of 1,800 goats. He was shot and his body was left at the side of the road in Las Cruces, New Mexico. It's not clear who exactly pulled the trigger and killed Garrett. As time passed, stories emerged and grew claiming that William Bonney was not actually killed and that Garrett and Bonney had staged the incident out of friendship so that Bonney could evade the law. Over the next 50 years, several men came forward and claimed that they were Billy the Kid, perpetuating the story that Bonney was still alive somewhere. Whilst the majority of these claims were easily disproven and dismissed, there is one claim, however, that has remained. No one has been able to prove with certainty that it's untrue. So the mystery goes on. In 1948, a probate investigator from St. Louis, Missouri, by the name of William V. Morrison, tracked down an elderly man in Florida named Joe Hines. Morrison was appointed to settle a court case involving Joe Hines, whose brother had died in Minot, North Dakota. Hines was essentially laying claim to his brother's land now that he had passed. An interesting sum of Sam link here too. Everything is related. Anyway, while Morrison was in the process of proving Hines' identity to the court, Morrison and Hines talked, and Hines casually admitted that he was in fact Jesse Evans. The Jesse Evans who, after he had been released from prison in Texas in 1882, had by all accounts completely vanished. Hines went on to tell Morrison of his experiences in the Lincoln County War with his friend Billy the Kid. Morrison took particular note of these claims because he was related to the Maxwell family of Fort Sumner. Evans, or Hines, stated that he had fought in the Lincoln County War back in 1878. More so, Hines stated that Billy the Kid was not actually killed by Pat Garrett in 1881, relaying the well-known rumours that had been circulating for over 50 years. Morrison was admittedly very sceptical, although he was interested due to his personal genealogy link, to hear more. Hines refused to reveal the current name or whereabouts of the kid, but he would provide some information that Morrison could follow, which would eventually allow him to track down William H. Brushy Bill Roberts to Hamilton, Texas. After Morrison had completed the Hines case, where he was finally awarded possession of his brother's North Dakota land, Morrison began a written correspondence with Brushy Bill. Now, just to interject at this point, rather than looking at this story through today's lens, remember that this is the late 1940s. There were still legitimately a number of Old West gunslingers still alive and around. Wyatt Earp, for example, didn't die until 1929. Elfego Baca died in 1945. Diamond Field Jack died in 1949. Burton Mossman died in 1956. And Tom Three Persons didn't die until 1969. So this story, at the time, granted was about one of the rock stars of the Old West, but it wasn't entirely out of the realms of possibility. Anyway, throughout Morrison's early correspondence with Roberts, Morrison was careful not to reveal anything that Hines had told him about his supposed true identity. Eventually, after several months of correspondence, Morrison asked Roberts to meet with him. Roberts acquiesced after several requests, and in June 1949, Morrison visited him at his small home in Hamilton, Texas. Writing in his journal, Morrison stated that Brushy Bill Roberts was about 5'8" tall and weighed around 165 pounds. He had blue eyes, small hands but large wrists, heavy shoulders, thinning grey hair, a high forehead, a prominent nose, and large ears. Roberts invited Morrison inside and introduced him to his wife Melinda. Morrison almost immediately asked Brushy Bill Roberts whether he truly was Billy the Kid, to which Brushy Bill vehemently denied the accusation. I guess Morrison got nervous or sick of waiting. Either way, all the work he had done in not revealing what Hines had told him kind of fell to pieces in this moment. Roberts denied the claim several times, although looked visibly uneasy and nervous when the subject came up, Morrison wrote. The purpose of Morrison's trip, it seemed, was over, and this extraordinary claim was dead in the water, so Morrison got up to leave. On the way out to the door, Roberts stopped Morrison and whispered to him to come back in the afternoon of the next day, when his wife would be out visiting a friend. Morrison agreed and returned the following afternoon. It was only then that Brushy Bill Roberts admitted to Morrison that he truly was Billy the Kid. He had lied to him the previous day, he said, as he didn't want his wife to be aware of his true identity. Morrison continued to interview Roberts extensively over the following year and amassed significant evidence from Roberts, as well as Hines, and also uncovered his own independent research to substantiate the claims. Eventually, Morrison was convinced that Roberts was in fact the true Billy the Kid. Brushy Bill Roberts shared numerous anecdotes and stories with Morrison that would fill in undocumented gaps in many aspects of the life of Billy the Kid too, many with significant historical accuracy and importance. Roberts also demonstrated his ability to slip out of handcuffs and told Morrison that Pat Garrett had actually shot and killed another gunslinger by the name of Billy Barlow, and not himself. Garrett then subsequently passed Barlow's body off as the Kid's in order to claim the bounty. This, Roberts said, allowed him to escape to Mexico. According to the details that Roberts shared with Morrison, which Morrison tape recorded, Roberts said, he was born William Henry Roberts on December the 31st, 1859, in an area of Texas known as Buffalo Gap. His parents were James H. and Mary Adeline Roberts. Mary Roberts died in 1862, while James left the family to fight in the Civil War. Catherine McCarty, Roberts said, was not his biological mother, but was actually his maternal half-aunt. After his mother died, Roberts went to live with Catherine and her son Joe. Fearing that Roberts' father might try to take him back when he returned from the war, McCarty covered her tracks and gave the name Henry McCarty to Roberts as an alias. When Roberts told of his days as Billy the Kid from 1877 to 1881, Morrison determined that Brushy knew way too much about the history of the Kid and the Lincoln County War to have read all about it and memorized everything in such detail. A number of things Roberts told Morrison at first glance may have seemed trivial, but actually turned out to be fairly significant and very important to his credibility, as few people, historians included, were actually aware of them. When it came to the events of the night of July 14th, 1881, Roberts said that a man named Billy Barlow was killed by Pat Garrett and not him. Barlow, he said, was partially Mexican, had a beard, looked like the Kid, but was a little younger than the Kid, and was possibly related to the Clements family, the cousins of John Wesley Hardin. Roberts also said that he doubted that Billy Barlow was the man's real name, given his Mexican heritage. After Barlow was killed, Roberts said he fled Fort Sumner for Mexico. In Mexico, he lived with a tribe of Yuki Indians for 2 years before returning to the United States, where he helped and worked in Carlton, Texas. He was arrested in Kansas City, where he was recognized as the Kid, but was released shortly after. He said he worked for Buffalo Bill Coldy in his Wild West show and worked for the Anti-Horse Thief Association from 1885 to 1889. He also worked for Judge Isaac Parker in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and joined the Pinkerton Detective Agency and worked as a U.S. Marshal investigating train robberies. Roberts also worked as a plainclothes policeman in Gladewater, Texas, and was married 4 times. This is all important as Morrison was able to verify all of these facts to be true through employment records. Further, it's worth noting that there were just 3 witnesses to the supposed murder of Billy the Kid: Pat Garrett, the shooter, and 2 deputies named John W. Poe and Thomas McKinney. McKinney stated that he knew Billy the Kid slightly, but Poe had never previously met him. Following the shooting, Poe told Garrett that he had, quote, shot the wrong man, unquote. It was pitch black in the room where the killing took place, and no one could see anything. Garrett told Poe that he knew it was Billy the Kid from his voice when he asked who was there. But all 3 men admitted the voice was a faint whisper, which in all likelihood could have been any man. Whilst Poe and McKinney would agree that Garrett had shot Billy the Kid in order for him to claim the bounty, and, of course, share it with them, McKinney would eventually recant the version of events several years later and claim, like Poe had already done too, that Garrett had killed someone else and not Billy the Kid. Residents of Fort Sumner, where the killing took place, also immediately disputed the death of the kid. The body was buried just the following day in a grave that had been flooded numerous times over the years. In fact, the grave that remains in the same location today likely contains no human remains of the body once buried there. Garrett was, however, able to secure his claim to the killing and all outstanding rewards, and the rest, as they say, is history. Roberts told Morrison that he would agree to tell the, quote, whole truth in exchange for a full pardon for Billy the Kid that had been promised by Governor Lew Wallace following the Lincoln County War. So Bill Roberts asked for Morrison's help in acquiring the pardon that he had been promised back in 1879, a pardon that Wallace had backtracked on. So in 1950, Morrison took the 90-year-old Roberts to the New Mexico Governor Thomas Mabry in order to present him and obtain a pardon for his historic crimes. While in New Mexico, Morrison and Roberts stopped by Fort Sumner and Lincoln. While at the courthouse in Lincoln, Roberts was able to show in detail to Morrison how he, as Billy the Kid, made his famous escape and killed deputies Bob Ollinger and James Bell. The locations, down to the exact spots, were verified by the staff at the location. Governor Thomas Mabry was not convinced by Roberts' claims following their meeting, however. He had invited a number of skeptics to attend the meeting, with Roberts and Morrison without their foreknowledge. Present in the room were several photographers and reporters, armed policemen, Oscar and Jarvis Garrett, Pat Garrett's sons, Cliff McKinney, Kip McKinney's son, Arcadia Brady, William Brady's grandson, and historians William Kelleher, E.B. Mann, and Will Robinson. The private meeting had developed into a media circus. The skeptics bombarded Roberts with questions and accusations of fraudulent claims and also poked fun at Roberts. The meeting was so confrontational that Roberts suffered a stroke during the meeting and was hospitalized and placed under the care of Dr. Stan Lloyd. Remember, he was 90 years old. Shortly after the meeting, Governor Thomas Mabry made a public announcement that Roberts was not going to pardon Brushy Bill Roberts because he did not believe him to be Billy the Kid. Morrison was disappointed with the outcome and horrified by how Roberts had been treated and the effect it had on his health. He firmly believed that Roberts had not had a fair hearing and was not treated appropriately for a man of his age. In the summer of 1950, Morrison moved, along with his family, to El Paso, Texas, in order to be closer to the investigation. Roberts and his wife also moved at this time to Hico in Texas. With the help of Ted Andress, a lawyer from an El Paso law firm, Morrison drew up papers necessary for Brushy Bill's pardon. Afterwards, Morrison wrote a report entitled, quote, "A Statement of Facts," unquote, which stated that William Bonney was promised a pardon in 1879 by Governor Lew Wallace, and that Billy was not killed in 1881, and that Billy still deserved this pardon. Included within the report were various documents related to Billy's life and the affidavits from Severo Gallegos, Martil Abel, Sam Jones and Jose Montoya, along with affidavits from two of Robert's friends, DeWitt Travis and Robert Lee, detailing other aspects of his life. Again, with the help of Andres, Morrison filed for the petition for the pardon on November 15th, 1950. On December the 27th, 1950, Roberts left his bed and told his wife that he was feeling well. He offered to walk to the local post office and mail a parcel for his wife. As he walked down the street, he suffered a sudden and major heart attack. He fell to the ground and died instantly. Following Roberts' death, Morrison collaborated with well-known and espied folklorist C.L. Sonneshan on a book titled Alias, Billy the Kid. It was published in 1955. Brushy Bill Roberts lived on West 2nd Street in Hico when he died, and was buried in Hamilton Cemetery, which is roughly 20 miles south of the township of Hico. His grave is adorned with Billy the Kid paraphernalia and proudly identifies Brushy Bill as the Kid. Even though the governor of Texas, at the time of his death, refused to provide Roberts with the pardon he sought, the Hico Chamber of Commerce still capitalized on Roberts' legacy by opening the Billy the Kid Museum in the historic western section of the town. A spurious link to the town at best, don't you think? Given that Brushy Bill had lived there for less than a year when he died. Downtown Hico is also home to a market devoted to Brushy Bill too. It reads, quote, Ollie L. Brushy Bill Roberts, alias Billy the Kid, died in Hico, Texas on December 27th, 1950, unquote. If Brushy Bill had been born in 1859, that would have made him 90 years old at the time of his death in Hico. Morrison later stated that upon examination of Robert's body at autopsy, there were 26 bullet and knife scars consistent with known injuries sustained by the real Billy the Kid. In addition, Morrison also attempted to track down the former Jesse Evans gang member Jim McDaniels, who was still alive at the time. He eventually located him in Round Rock, Texas, where he, Severo Gallegos, Jose Montoya and Martil Abel, furthered Evans' gang acquaintances still alive, all signed affidavits which verified their firm belief that Brushy Bill Roberts was in fact Billy the Kid. They had all been close friends with the Kid back in the Lincoln County war days, so their word held substantial water. The book, which was subsequently written by Morrison and Sonneshan, received mixed reviews when it was released, though it did have one notable fan. Former President Harry S. Truman wrote to Morrison stating that he believed that Brushy Bill was Billy the Kid, and lamented that he died before being able to go in front of the next governor, where, Truman said, Roberts may have gotten a more favourable result relating to his request for a pardon. So, is there any truth to Brushy Bill Roberts' claims? They're entirely fascinating in my view, because if proven, it would be a huge rewrite of history, something which those who control the official narrative really don't like doing. Appreciate that sounds pretty paranoid and tinfoil hat, but see Graham Hancock for further examples. Let's look at the evidence for and against. Like the actual evidence, not some opinions of people on Reddit who once knew a guy they worked with in a pizza restaurant who claimed to ride with Billy the Kid. I'm being cheeky, sorry. So firstly, the information I found on Brushy Bill Roberts online is particularly difficult to wade through. Internet sources and online historians are often biased in the information that they wish to peddle and share. They are, for the most part, trying to prove that Brushy Bill Roberts either was, or was not, the real Billy the Kid. Accurate information on the subject is also extremely difficult to come by. But this is often the case online for most research topics. The internet is growing less and less reliable, in my opinion, as a place for accurate research. But that's my personal opinion, and I want to make that clear. I'm a firm believer in old-fashioned research from books with the sources clearly laid out. But that's just me. Though, that aside, I firmly believe that when a historian's personal agenda and biases are pushed as far as being accurate, then the historian loses their objectivity. Again, my personal view. So as usual on Dead Souls, I'm going to try and explain both sides of the evidence equally without letting personal beliefs affect the matter. When it comes to a significant historical hoax or shift in historical truth, like this story or claim is, then evidence and objectivity is paramount. A 1990 study, which utilized photo comparison software at the Laboratory for Vision Studies and the Advanced Graphic Laboratory at the University of Texas, was conducted by image experts Scott Acton and Alan Bovick. Acton and Bovick used methods, equipment, and facial recognition software that were used by MI6, the FBI, CIA, and the Interpol agency at the time. The software results and ultimate outcome of the study provided a, quote, significant level of statistical validity, unquote. Verified photographs of Brushy Bill Roberts at age 14 matched with a historic Diedrich Upham tintype of Billy the Kid. Further, a photograph of Roberts at the age of 71 returned a 93% match against multiple photographs of Billy the Kid. These findings would have to be replicated under scientific testing criteria to be scientifically conclusive, however. In 2003, the Sheriff of Lincoln County, Tom Sullivan, the DeBaca County Sheriff, Gary Graves, and the Mayor of Capitan, New Mexico, Steve Sedenwall, established a project to exhume the remains of Billy the Kid and his mother, Catherine Antrim, to conduct DNA testing with the aim of providing evidence and facts that the body in the grave at Fort Sumner was in fact the real Billy the Kid. The initiative encountered difficulties from the get-go, however. Mainly that there is no official confirmation as to where exactly the remains of the supposed body of Billy the Kid are located. There was no way to legally guarantee they were located beneath the grave marker which existed at that time. The project faced significant legal obstacles, and the exhumation of both sets of remains were blocked by a judge in September 2004. So a mixed bag of evidence either way at the moment. But I'm going to let you decide ultimately. This is additional evidence and circumstantial information that supports Brushy Bill Roberts being the genuine Billy the Kid. 1. Brushy Bill Roberts' knowledge of the Lincoln County War and the life of Billy the Kid was so extensive to have been read and memorized. Several of the things Roberts knew were known to only a few people at the time, including historians. For example, he knew that Colonel Dudley soldiers that entered Lincoln on July 19, 1878 were all black. He knew all the details of how the Kid had to pay his lawyer for his services at his trial, and he knew that Billy the Kid wrote a letter to Governor Lew Wallace proclaiming his innocence in the murder of James Carlisle, and he knew exactly how the McSween house was set up before it was burned. 2. In 1949, when Morrison and Roberts visited the old Lincoln County Courthouse, which was also once the Murphy Dolan Riley store incidentally, Roberts described how the building looked during the Kid's incarceration there, sharing detailed information of how the building looked in 1881. He said how when he killed Bell, one of the guards, the bullet first hit the wall and then ricocheted into Bell's side, which is true. His description of the building in 1881 were also verified by historic building records. 3. In Roberts' possessions, he had a very old scarf that he claimed to have gotten from De Lavina Maxwell after he was first captured at Stinking Springs and thus brought to Fort Sumner. He said he gave De Lavina the tintype of himself and she gave him the scarf in return. This really did happen, but only posse member James East knew of it, and only he spoke of it in a letter that he wrote to fellow lawman Charlie Siringo. This was not common knowledge to anyone other than historians who had researched that specific letter. 4. Roberts said that when he went to trial, his first indictment was for the murder of Bugshot Roberts, and that he was represented by Ira Leonard. He also said that Leonard was able to get the case thrown out. This is true, but very, very few researchers knew of this back during the time that Richards made the claim. Again, only historians who had researched that particular historic court record from the time. 5. Severo Gallegos, Jose Montoya, and Martil Abel, all surviving friends of Billy the Kid, met with Roberts separately. Roberts talked with them all about the events from his past as Billy the Kid, and all three men signed legal affidavits attesting to the fact that Billy the Kid and Brushy Bill were one and the same man. Bill and Sam Jones, also surviving friends of Billy the Kid, also met with Roberts. Although they did not sign affidavits in support of Roberts due to the fact that they wanted to avoid any publicity, they did tell Morrison that they firmly believed him to be the real Billy the Kid. Jesse Evans, or Joe Hines as he was later known, confirmed to Morrison that Roberts was absolutely Billy the Kid. Bob Young, a native of Round Rock, Texas, visited Hamilton, Texas in 1930 and first met Roberts then. The two became friends, and Roberts informed Young that he would like to accompany him on his return to Round Rock to visit a friend. When the time came for Young to return home, Roberts regretfully said that he couldn't accompany him since his wife was poorly. Still, Roberts asked Young to look up an old friend of his by the name of Jimmy McDaniels, who, as it turned out, was a former member of the Jesse Evans gang and veteran of the Lincoln County War. McDaniels also lived in Round Rock at the time, which was widely unknown to the public. Roberts went on to tell Young that when he found McDaniels, to simply tell him that the kid says hello. When Young returned to Round Rock and met with McDaniels and delivered his message, McDaniels looked as if he had seen a ghost. He was visibly shaken by the comment. During an incident in the 1940s, Roberts was walking down a street in Hico. Also walking down the street was a 5-year-old boy and his mother. When the boy ran into the street and was almost hit by a car, the mother yelled out her son's name, Billy, loudly. Witnesses said that Roberts spun around and reached for a firearm on his hip. After Roberts realized his name wasn't being called, he hurried away. Although this is not technically evidence in support of Roberts' claim, and in no way connects him directly to Billy the Kid, it does indicate that he was a man who was used to answering to the name Billy, at least. In 1945, Roberts was seen in a Hico street. An ex-lawman by the name of Henry Anthony was with his sons at the time, and Anthony saw Roberts walking toward him. Anthony immediately yelled out at Roberts, calling him Billy Bonnie, and told him to throw up his hands. It took both of his sons to calm him, but Anthony stated that Roberts was in fact Billy the Kid and should be apprehended. Roberts, it was said, didn't reply and made a swift exit at the time. Anthony swore for the rest of his life that Robert was the kid in hiding. Now, on the flip side of the coin, let's also summarize the evidence and information that seems to disprove that Roberts was Billy the Kid. Here we go. Sheriff Pat Garretts said that he killed Billy the Kid, and Deputy John Poe and Deputy Thomas McKinney confirmed this. Almost everyone else who claimed to have seen the body of the man Garrett killed agreed to this at the time. No contemporary account carries any mention of the gunfight that Roberts claimed had happened between himself and Garrett, Poe and McKinney after Barlow had been killed. There exists no evidence, other than the word of Roberts, that Billy Barlow, the man he said Garrett really killed, ever existed. Although Billy Barlow was almost certainly an alias, it is said. When retelling his story, Roberts did make several historical errors. Although a good portion of these dealt with events and facts that were questionable in the first place, and therefore dubious, an example being where Roberts said he was present at Tunstall's funeral, this may have been so. Roberts also said that it was Fred Waite who was shot by Billy Matthews during the Brady assassination and not Jim French, although contemporary accounts also differ as to who the wounded regulator actually was. But again, this is not clear in the historical record. There were some facts that were definitely wrong though. For example, Roberts said that John Selman fought on the McSween side in the Lincoln County War. However, Selman did not fight for either side and didn't even arrive in Lincoln until after the final battle of the war had taken place. Roberts claimed that throughout 1871 to 1874, he left the care of Catherine McCarty a few times to visit his biological father, James Roberts, in Texas, and ended up staying with him for a period of 2 years. However, there exists no contemporary evidence that the real Billy the Kid ever left the care of Catherine McCarthy, especially for so long a period of time. Roberts also claimed that after he fled Silver City in 1875, up until the autumn of 1877, he basically travelled over the entire West, Arizona, Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska and Oregon, making a living as a bronc rider. However, although documentation of Billy the Kid's life during this period is sparse, the documentation that does exist seems to indicate that he spent his time in Arizona, operating as a horse and saddle thief. Although, to be fair, Roberts' claims doesn't necessarily discount that either. In 1988, physicist and amateur photo expert Thomas Kyle underwent a photo comparison study between the tintype photo of Billy and a photo of Brushy Bill taken at his meeting with Governor Mabry. Although he used his own methods and his home Apple Macintosh II computer, he announced that in his opinion, the two photos were of two different people. Finally, Brushy Bill Roberts had a well-known friendship with J. Frank Dalton, a proven false Jesse James claimant. Although this is technically not evidence against Roberts' own claim, it does cast a shadow of a doubt over his own credibility. As I have stated previously, I love a large-scale hoax, but whether you believe this, in fact, is a hoax, or if you choose to believe the claims of Brushy Bill Roberts being the real Billy the Kid, I will ultimately leave up to you to decide, based on the information presented. Either Brushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid, or he was a pretender who knew more about Billy the Kid than anyone else at the time. If Roberts was an imposter, then the 90-year-old man had done his research and prepared his presentation extremely well. But ask yourself this. Roberts did not seek any publicity or notoriety for his claims during his lifetime, and actively hid his claims until the final year of his life. What could a 90-year-old man possibly gain from claiming to be Billy the Kid? All Roberts was seeking was a pardon from the governor for historic crimes. A pardon he sought in private, with no media involvement or any other people supporting him with advanced knowledge of his campaign. It's one of the most amazing stories told in recent history, in my opinion, and it's rarely discussed today. What do you think? Do you believe Brushy Bill Roberts? Do you believe that Billy the Kid survived Pat Garretts' attack and lived until 1950? As always, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. You can contact me via our website, deadsouls.co.uk, or you can send me a direct message through Instagram. I check and reply to all messages, so please reach out. One final point tonight. This week we will start our California series of episodes. A number of subjects and episodes that we recently travelled to the United States in order to research and meet with a number of people who shared with us their extraordinary stories and experiences. Stay tuned for those. I promise you, they are going to be episodes that you don't want to miss. Until then, good night, everyone.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show tonight. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform and subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode. Our shows aren't sponsored by any company or corporation, so any support you can give us goes a long way in supporting the work that we do. From all of us here at Dead Souls, sleep tight.